Welcome to This Medical Life podcast. These are the stories of medicine with Steve Davis and Dr. Travis Brown. This is the story of reflecting on stories. Dr. Travis Brown, Series 5 is coming to a close now. We've got a few weeks break before we start with Series 6 again. We've covered a lot in Series 5, from fantastic feces to pelvic pain and endometriosis.
It's a time when I look back, and we've put together some clips that have stood out to, whether it be a lighthearted moment, whether it just be something that's really interesting. But if I don't do a sort of a physical reflection, you sort of just keep on moving on. And sometimes that's hard. In medicine, it's actually really easy just to keep on feeling sort of a bit drained, and it takes a little bit of time to say, well, what have I done? And this is doctors in general, because you'll be just, dealing with the next patient and the next patient and the next patient, and then you got the next day and the next patient. And you sometimes have to take time to say, well, where am I at? Here we are at the clinic, or started up a clinic, or I've done this course, or I've done. So we're probably not really good at reflecting about what we've done, where we've come from. I remember doing exams and you just go on to the next one and the next one.
So you're drawing an analogy between the life it is as a doctor or someone in the medical field and the life as is crafting podcasts about the medical field. It's a similar sort of treadmill.
Well, yeah, this is and this is often a lot of times with people. It's just going on to the next task and the next task, and sometimes it's actually takes just a nice moment to look back. And some of the episodes, lactose intolerance and stuff, some of them get a reaction that you weren't expecting. You get a lot more feedback. But if I don't take the moment to actually look back and have a bit of time and even, re-listen to some of the stuff, then I might just get a little bit worn down.
And we've got that coming up. So basically for the Australian Podcast Awards, you pull together a 15-minute little snippet of 5 different episodes. So we'll play what we put together for our submission a little bit later.
Yeah, I find that really useful. Not that there's anything for awards, it's in the eye of the beholder, but it actually forces me to say, well, look back and, listen to some of the episodes. Did anything stand out? And so it's actually a really nice exercise for me.
Can you remember what episode was it that you had a GP say to you, thank you, because it actually directly and positively impacted the treatment pathway that we followed for a patient? What was that topic?
Yeah, that was the vitamin B, B6, and there was a phone call from a doctor who was asking advice, one of our listeners.
Yes.
And then at the end of the conversation, he said, look, thank you. We had, I and another patient, another doctor, had someone who came in with peripheral nerve symptoms, and we did the vitamin B6 test, and it was sky high. And so you find, and that's really nice that you get that kind of feedback, and it's just one of those things that you're making a difference every once in a while. And even if someone can't remember off the top of the head, they can go, oh, I remember this, and check back.
Planting seeds. And we had a Paralympian contact us. What topic was that about?
That was about CTE and understanding.
That's right. That she had lots of knocks to the head.
And was concerned about it herself.
Yes.
And so they're going on to do other, this helped them understand that topic more. And again, it was from a source that is trustworthy and understand a lot more. So,
and as a result, she's made direct contact with the brain bank and is all set up so that her brain will be part of the brain bank to further the science. So, isn't it amazing? Yeah,
it is. And these are just some of the impacts that you have in medicine and podcasts. Again, podcasting I wasn't something I was ever familiar with, doing this and sending things out into the ether. But yes, this is a podcast for doctors, and sometimes we're not great at being able to give good feedback, but we do get glimpses of.
And I do want to note for the record, and most people listening will know this, you are a man who just w- lives within a realm of humility. You just get on with what you do. You don't look for any great awards or anything. And it's interesting because when I think GPs, specialists, etc., I have them with on a pedestal with the realm of status. And so therefore, yes, I have got a warmish relationship with my GP who's suffered through me for many, many years now, but I still hold him on a pedestal. And I just recently heard a great interview with Dr. Adam Seafew on the podcast called Econ Talk. We're going to have a listen to a snippet in just a moment. But he is quite well known for writing books and papers reflecting on how do I give the best care to my patients and make that application of care equal, no matter whether they come in a Rolls Royce, they're at the other end of society and struggling, whether they're catty and bitchy, whether they're sweet. How do I try to travel the higher path throughout there? And he noticed one thing: there is a type of patient who will try to undermine the status the doctor has, deliberately not using the term doctor, being gruff, etc. And in this interview, he reflects openly about how I know that I'm not meant to get my back up at that, but it makes it really hard as a human to you've really got to work harder to still look after this person. So let's have a quick listen to that, and I want to get your feedback.
I will say to the patient, Mr. Roberts, Dr. Roberts, what would you like to be called? And then I will respond in that same way. I will not tell people what to call me. I'm sort of perfectly happy with them calling me, Dr. Seafew, Adam, whatever they like. If they say Mr. Seafew, I usually say, you can call me anything, call me Adam, call me Dr. Seafew, just don't call me Mr. Seafew. I've worked very hard for that degree. It seems weird for me. And so most of the time when patients come in and say, Adam, how are you? They're people who I've already known and I'm very comfortable with. The people who address me as that right off the bat, it does seem like a little bit of a power play to me.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah. And I'm sort of fine with it, but it gives me some information about the patient, about the person I'm dealing with. And it makes me understand a little bit more about who they are, what they expect from the relationship, how I think they're going to treat me. And so in a way, maybe as the person doing that, it's fine. It's a way of signaling, and it probably cuts out a lot of the time of trying to work to understand who this person is.
You have been a patient, certainly, in your life, and you've gone to doctors' offices. When you're sitting there in that beautiful robe, it's much like a spa, really, usually when you're at a doctor's office. When you're sitting in that flimsy robe or in some state of undress, do you find yourself reflecting on this issue, that the person on the other side of that relationship may not be seeing you as a peer, or may be, and how that affects your ability to share your symptoms and so on?
I do. Interestingly, from me, given my role and now, advancing age, I think so much when I'm in that position about how I'm going to make sure that I'm actually being seen as a patient rather than as a doctor. And make sure that I'm, in a way, being treated like everybody else, spoken to like everybody else. And I probably overplay the patient role because I have seen so many, let's call them VIPs, treated poorly because people are so careful about how they're going to ask questions and what kind of tests they're going to recommend. And I want to stress so intensely that, God, you got to take care of me like you would take care of anybody else. Maybe an opposite reaction than people would expect, but I embrace the paper gown, I guess.
So I think that's an interesting twist, that he's, having been at one end of that spectrum when he is a patient, he does defer to the doctor, and he knows that he plays that role, and then he gets better care. He's just making it easier for the doctor to engage with him. Now, you've got some very different thoughts on this whole realm of doctors and titles.
Well, I do. I come from it from the other perspective. I actually prefer patients to talk with me, everyone to actually talk with me as Travis or Trav, whatever. I actually found the doctor-patient relationship, that sort of social construct, not counterproductive, but I didn't enjoy it. It was sort of like, I'm going to defer to you. You are, higher in status or something to that effect. And, this is the tertiary hospital hierarchical structure where you've got professor, associate professor, doctor, and, this whole rigid feel, which when I was traversing it as a junior doctor, I actually thought it was counterproductive. It will have its own structure, and it has a reason for that. Every part of society has that. I found, though, the sort of a flat structure, a business structure, actually much more of a equal playing field. And I thought, from my perspective, if I genuinely look at it, I thought, well, I've got this person who is with me, and this is a journey of their health, as opposed to I am the doctor. I'm going to help direct themselves. And this is actually also based in society. Australians are far more relaxed with titles. And I've encountered doctors who come from overseas, and if they actually get referred to as, Liam or, Paul, it's actually quite an affront. Whereas a lot of people don't mind that in Australia.
But don't we then rob ourselves of, what do they call it? It's a white coat syndrome?
Yeah, well, that's right. There's an effect. And it's a role. There's a role. And look, we don't use white coats much here in Australia at all that I'm aware of. I haven't seen white coats walking around wards doing ward rounds at all that I can remember. Whereas this is something where in the United States it's actually a very large thing to get your jacket or get your coat. And so there is actually a whole bunch of social constructs that go into this doctor-patient relationship. And so, I actually tell people, no, call me Trav, call me Travis. I've got no problems with that. I actually prefer that.
If you had to wear a coat, they said, as of tomorrow, you have to wear a coat, what colour would you choose?
I'd probably do bright pink just to mess with the system and see if, no, this isn't really appropriate, Dr. Travis Brown. I was like, just call me Trav.
Look, we had a lot of great episodes in this last season or series, and for me, tonsillectomies, to excise or not to excise, was one of the hardest ones to be part of and listen to, having gone through a tonsillectomy as a young adult, and hearing that maybe it's not necessarily going to be gotten into with as much relish as it used to in the past, and sort of shaving off bits of tonsil like a leg ham at a deli. My goodness, it was quite gruesome.
The amazing thing about what we all talk about, and it's not until you delve into the history, is how recent our knowledge is. If you're looking even at these points, and we've got one coming up in the future about heart attacks. If you walked into a hospital in 1940s, 1950s with a heart attack, the chances of you leaving that was probably really low because we didn't have any treatments. There was no consensus on what we treat. Now you think about, or even testing for it was, well, how do you test for it? And, we had ECGs, but, the real knowledge started happening in the 60s and 70s. That's knowledge that is 60 to 70 years old. You had a heart attack 100 years ago, you'd either survive or you wouldn't, but the doctors wouldn't be doing much. And this is where our understanding of all this knowledge is coming from. And so it's interesting. The amazing thing I think that I've learnt the most about all of this is how hard it is for doctors, just in general, to get recognition of innovative ideas. We always think, an idea in itself is a great, advertiser to other people. But almost every idea or every change in idea actually hits this proverbial wall for ideas to be challenged, for the status quo to be challenged, for this to be taken on as new knowledge, to really change the way we practice. And everyone goes, "Oh, you just do a study." Even studies are challenged by the status quo. "Oh, we think you're wrong. This is not correct." And so then we have studies that compare other studies to see that, yes, we got the same results. So our knowledge is actually, the normal way we learn is actually through challenging ideas, challenging the status quo, and it can take decades for people to come on board.
And is there an episode that stands out for you? I know it's like asking a parent if you've got a favourite child.
The episodes that stand out for me are stories that come out of left field, that you just, we're going through the motions with, understanding this new topic. And the one that came up with was Dr. Yuri Nikiforov, where we were actually talking with Dr. Rachel Chambers, and she just mentioned, she said, "Oh, I've spoken with Yuri about how he came with molecular testing for thyroids," and both of our ears pricked up and gone, "Well, what's that story?" Where they were at Chernobyl and started to see the incidence of pediatric thyroid cancer going up. And just those little nuggets of stories, and Yuri was lovely enough to come on. Just those little parts where you just find just amazing stories that aren't necessarily either out there, and then you talk to someone about it. I think that one probably stands out just the most because it was not something I knew about at all.
Yeah, and also I think it was in season 5 that we did the BRCA doubleheader, looking into breast cancer and the genes related to that.
Yeah, look, the real challenge, what we're finding now in medicine, is molecular pathology is exponentially rising. And it's changing so much that even when I trained, I won't have come across even new conditions, new diagnoses. And some of the cancer classification books now are heavily based in molecular, which is not something I came across at all when I was studying. And that was less than 10 years ago when I finished my studies. So this is now, and I'm studying in the area. How does someone who's not even studying in the area understand this? And so this is the power of the podcast. My ultimate aim is to help GPs, doctors and healthcare professionals keep up to date, have hopefully some entertaining stories to go along with it, but to actually say this is what you need to know. And I went to conferences. I'm not sure if you're the same. A full weekend, which was just a long time to take out from family and from work. And I remember thinking, well, if I learn about 4 or 5 things from this conference, well, that's been of benefit, but that's a full weekend. So if doctors are able to learn, 2, maybe 3 things from a podcast episode, then that's of benefit.
And it's also been quite a privilege when we've had episodes where patients have been happy to come on, like, for example, pregnancy and epilepsy, dispelling the myths. What a great journey that was.
And I knew that was for a very, very sort of small segment of the population, but it can be really impactful because you can sort of allay some fears for people to say, no, we can do a lot here and, dispel some myths.
All right, we've got some new stories coming up. They're in the can or in the process of going into the can. Our interviewing continues, and I think now is probably the perfect time to put our feet up on the chair and listen to 15 minutes of really snippets you might have missed, as depending on what episodes you've caught or haven't caught, to get a flavour of what the journey's been like over for the Australian Podcast Awards. It was the beginning of July 2023 until the end of June this year, 2024. So here's some potted highlights from that. Travis Brown, I'll see you next season.
Thanks very much, Steve.
Or should I say, Doctor.
people who go on safari in southern Africa and eastern Africa often get bitten by a very aggressive tick there. We don't have this tick in Australia, but it loves biting people. And they come back to Australia because the incubation period's about a week to 2 weeks. And they get sick in Australia. And if they don't mention to the doctor that, oh, I've been on safari in South Africa, he or she may not think, oh, it could be African tick typhus. But if you look, you'll find an S scar. So it's definitely worth looking. But it takes time because patients got to take off all their clothes. You've got to look in private parts, and probably just as easy to think could be rickettsia and give a diagnosis of based on clinical presentation, epidemiology. And it's well worthwhile sending a serum off to the laboratory as well to confirm the diagnosis, because then if you aren't right, you know, well, it's not rickettsia. Or if you are right, you've got confirmed, oh, yes, I've given the right treatment.
We started off this episode talking about Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Is the US travel a consideration?
Yes, it is. It's not. It's called Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and it's caused by a very virulent rickettsia, actually, a very nasty one. It's the one that killed rickets, and it's actually found all through the Americas now: North America, Central America, and South America, and we see it occasionally in return travellers. But you only see it in people who've been exposed to the ticks. So people that have been sort of bushwalking and camping and doing natural activities. If you go to New York, you probably won't get it.
Look, let's just draw a breath for a moment and come back to the last part of our interview. And while we're doing this, I'll contact Tourism Australia, because we get bad press down here that everything kills you. Spiders, we can at least say our ticks pretty much don't.
No, we've got very nice ticks and very nice rickettsia. If you want just a mild infection, do come to Australia. The trouble is our Australian doctors may not recognise this rickettsia. And you may get penicillin. You may get penicillin instead of doxycycline.
In my day job, I have a number of clients who are women of a particular age, and this year more than ever, when they've been experiencing symptoms related to menopause, they've been open in discussing it, which is not something I've noticed much over my 20 years in my consulting. Is this attitude change that you're talking about?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I've noticed even in the year and a half or nearly 2 years now since my book came out, there's been a lot more open conversation about it, which is an excellent thing. And I think it's a generational change. Gen X women, I mean, our generation, are actually not the kind of women who are going to go and sit quietly in the corner, and stuff. We want to talk about it, and it hasn't been talked about before. And so what I have found in a lot of the work that I'm doing now is actually speaking on this topic, and in workplaces in particular. Once you start a conversation about it, women want to talk about it and want to open up about it and keep that conversation going. So it is a real change, I think, in terms of our whole approach to it as a society. And I think that only can be a good thing for future generations coming through.
Yeah. You touched on early treatments of menopause. Can you just give us a little bit of an insight to what kind of treatments you're mentioning?
Well, yeah, I mean, you probably don't need me to explain to you that the misogynistic roots of early medicine, the things that were baked into medicine in the early days, which was this idea of the woman's body as inferior, as a defective version of a man's body, and so women who. I had some very interesting interviews with medical historians on this topic, because women were seen as kind of a little bit mad and dangerous anyway back in the days of early medicine. Talking the early Greek physicians, and so stretching all the way into probably even the 19th century, there was this idea that there was a buildup of blood, that blood is bad. Women are suspicious. But first of all, there was the wandering uterus theory, where they believed that the uterus kind of wandered around inside the body, causing problems. And the only way to sort of calm a woman down was by getting pregnant, basically. There was that. And then when women stopped, they knew that women stopped menstruating at a certain point, but they were deeply suspicious about what happened to all of that blood. Did it just build up inside the body? This idea of bad blood. So there was a lot of bloodletting that went on in various forms, which is kind of a sort of a treatment for a lot of things back in the day. And then there were some really horrific things like clitoridectomies, believe it or not, because of what they perceived to be excess heat, excess heat building up in the body, which, I mean, kind of makes sense if you think about menopause and hot flushes and things. They were identifying the symptom, they just weren't really treating it in the most appropriate way.
We'd like to start with your first case of CTE that you diagnosed. Can you walk us through that?
It took me a long time to finally get that first brain to look at. But that very first one, I can actually talk about it because I know the family are very happy and have talked about it before. But that was the late, great Steve Folkes, Canterbury Bulldogs legend and premiership winning coach who tragically passed away, I think it was in 2018. I was able to examine his brain, and that was really the first time I'd examined a brain from someone like that. I still remember putting that first slide under the microscope with the tau stain on it, and just it was like I was looking at a picture from one of the medical, one of the medical journals that the Boston group had published describing the pathology. It was like, there it is, it's there. I then realised, actually, in retrospect, because generally the way we'd been sampling the brain to look at under the microscope was such that because we weren't thinking about CTE, we weren't sampling it in the right way. So the way I had been taught as a pathology trainee, I'd spent a lot of time in forensics, the way I'd been taught to sample and examine a brain, which obviously was a very good way, but it was a way in which you were unlikely to detect the disease. Part of my job now as well is to try and educate all the forensic pathologists and all autopsy pathologists that you gotta sample the brain this way if you want to be able to really properly screen it for CTE.
What was your response from the community and sporting organisations once you'd said, we actually have a case of CTE in Australia?
It was not overwhelmingly positive, I have to say that. It generated a lot of debate. I don't recall being contacted directly by any sporting organisation after we published our first case. Certainly earlier on, to be honest, I think actually now that the sporting codes are better than they were back then. So we only talked about our first case after we had published in a very high quality peer-reviewed scientific journal. And similarly, the first case in Australian rules football, we only talked about it after our results have been published in a peer-reviewed, again, high-quality scientific journal, a neuropathology journal. I do remember quite significant pushback from sporting doctors. I've never seen a sports medicine sort of training curriculum, but I'm not entirely sure how much time they spend on the diagnosis and classification of degenerative brain diseases. I suspect it's not a lot. So nevertheless, some of them feel very, very strongly that that falls within their remit or their area of expertise. I think that's something that should be addressed.
I really get a sense, as the outsider from the medical world here, that we haven't necessarily gone deep legally into this scenario, because I could imagine in our family getting an anonymous letter, your curiosity is going to be piqued and conversations will happen. But the other thing that's entwirled with this, Erin, this is you as a human necessarily than a doctor, is we hear this no person is an island as a philosophy. Your field brings that to a sharp focus. We are all absolutely linked. I feel this is a watch this space as we learn, thanks to your discipline, just how interconnected everything is.
Yeah, it can be very challenging, and you're right. It does kind of bring that family management and that interconnectedness to the forefront. It would be interesting to see if it was ever legally challenged. And I do agree that when patients receive a dear relative letter, it piques the curiosity. And often patients can kind of figure out for themselves where this genetic fault may have come from. But in families that are truly estranged, it is a way that you can share that information.
So Looking at this in this episode, we're talking about the role of BRCA and familial cancer. What about patients who are BRCA negative but still have a strong family history? What do we do with these patients?
Yeah. So I guess my first question in that situation would be, when was the patient tested? When did that BRCA1 or 2 negative result come through? Because testing technology and our knowledge of genetics is rapidly improving. So I guess any patient or family that was tested more than 10 years ago, we need to revisit, are they truly BRCA negative, or is there something there that just couldn't have been identified with the previous testing technology? Now, that being said, BRCA is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to breast cancer genetics. And it's they're the famous genes. They get all the press. They have a catchy name. But there are, 10, 12, maybe even more other genes that can predispose to familial breast and ovarian cancer. And so when we order a test now, a modern standard test, we don't ever actually just test BRCA1 and 2 in isolation. We order a panel-based test. We test, 10 or 12 breast cancer predisposition genes simultaneously.
Is there anything in the future that could indeed extend a healthy human life? And B, how would you feel if this was just a slight pause and you had another 200 years ahead of you in your field?
So, Steve, I think the challenge there is huge. If we think of the length of DNA in your body, there's about 10 light days of DNA in your body. If I was to take all of the DNA and lay it out end to end, it would take about 10 days to traverse that distance at the speed of light. Now, that length of DNA is not just a bit of bland string. It is a very precise genetic code. And so if we were to maintain that genetic code, you'd need to be able to identify and correct errors in that. And that would take a fair amount of energy. The second law of thermodynamics says that if you want to maintain order, this is my paraphrase on it, if you want to maintain order, you need to put energy into a system. So I don't know that anyone's actually worked out how much energy would be required to maintain 10 light days worth of DNA in its pristine state. But I think it would suffice to say that it's lots. And my question is, how could that be applied? And even if it is applied, we must remember that genes are not all that we are, that our memories and so on are going to be shaped by proteins and methylation and all sorts of other things that make us who we are. So I think whilst I'm sure that there will be actions that can be taken to extend our lives, I doubt it would be possible to achieve eternal life, as it were, unending life. Let me say, I think that there are some people who are proposing a different approach to this, which is to upload all of your thoughts and emotions and processes into a computer, and then you don't face that problem at all. I am very wary of that because it's a bit like artificial intelligence. We call it artificial intelligence, but in fact, it's not very intelligent at all. And I think that if you think about what you might be able to upload into a computer, you're constraining your understanding of the human condition. So, in my view, I don't think that these things will happen in the grand sense that you've described. Would I want them to? It comes down to who you are and what you believe. So we come back to Travis's theological question. For me, I've lived a good life. I've been able to raise children to independence and to be nice men. I've had a career where I've been able to provide professional services, to build some good relationships, and to feel that in a small way I've been able to leave my patch of the earth in a better way than it was. I've done a bit. And so if the good Lord were to call me home tomorrow, that would be absolutely fine. I'm sure there'd be people around who'd be disappointed, but I'm confident that in my life after death, and so I would not be fussed by that call home.
I think that means you're not getting an invite to Steve's 300th birthday.
Either that or I'll send you a lightning bolt.
I'll raise a toast to you. This Medical Life is recorded in the Talked About Marketing Studios in Adelaide. For show notes and more information about the podcast, visit thismedicallife.com.au. You can contact the hosts on social media. Dr. Travis Brown can be found on X. His username is @Dr. Travis Brown. That's Dr. Travis Brown. And Steve Davis can be found on LinkedIn. Go to linkedin.com/in/The Real Steve Davis. This has been a PathNotes Proprietary Limited production.